You are listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I am your host, Ali Essig. I want to start this week's episode with a story. Now, this story is of the worst day of my life. It was March 30th, 2012, and I was sitting in my family room with my first and only daughter at the time. She was 9 months old, playing with toys, and I was watching a show on my iPad. I was super involved in the show. In fact, when my mom called, I didn't answer the phone because it was almost to the end, right at the climax. Then she called again, and then she called again. This time I answered, and I'll never forget the words that she said. She said, "Ali, your dad is dead." And I was shocked. Like, what are you talking about? My dad's dead. What do you mean? What happened? What's going on? And she said, well, he took a lunch break to go spend the afternoon with 3 of his sons, and they went to go shooting, one of his favorite things to do. He brought one of his coworkers with him, and they had packed up their guns and went and walked to this really nice secluded area. And after they'd walked a little bit of a distance, they got to the point, and all of a sudden my dad collapsed. Immediately, my brother performed CPR. My other brother gave him a blessing. They tried to revive him. The other brother called 911. They did everything they possibly could. The ambulance came, they performed CPR, and then they declared him dead. There was nothing else that they could do. He changed literally in the blink of an eye. He was alive one moment and gone the next. My mom came to the scene and was sitting there by his body when she called me. And I just begged her, well, tell the ambulance to come back. Tell them that to try again, bring him back to life. And she said, they can't. There's nothing they can do, Ali. He's gone. I hung up the phone and immediately prayed, begged God, bring him back. Give him a second chance. He can't be gone. This can't be it. And it didn't happen. That prayer was not answered. And I immediately called my husband, told him what happened, and booked a flight as soon as I could, got home that night, and was just in shock. I just couldn't believe that my dad, he was just 55 years old, that he could be gone just like that there was no warning heart attack. I mean, how many of us know of so many people who have a warning heart attack, who maybe they were out running and it just so happened that when they collapsed, that an ambulance happened to go by? Or maybe you know of someone who was having a heart attack and were able to recognize the signs early on and get help right away, that they survived it. They had stints put in and they were just fine, and honestly didn't even have to change their diet afterwards because they're feeling better than ever now that everything's cleared up. How many of those stories have you heard? I think there's so many more stories that are more similar to mine. And as I've shared my story with others, I have been flooded with so many other examples of individuals who've had the same experience. And that a lot of times we think that heart disease is because of a genetic history. But truthfully, heart disease is the #1 killer in America. According to the CDC's, it remains the leading cause of death in the United States and is responsible for nearly 700,000 deaths every year. That's one person every 34 seconds, or 1 in 5 deaths. And what's even more alarming is that all of these early deaths are actually preventable. This doesn't have to be this way. My dad was only 55. He could have lived a much longer life. And honestly, if it wasn't for not only his death, but also my husband's stroke, I don't think I'd be here sharing what I know now, because it took not just 1, but 2 for me to finally say, enough is enough. This is ridiculous. We have power. We can do something about this. In fact, often I have felt like Emma Smith, who was cleaning up the mess in the room of the prophets of all of the tobacco that was on the ground and cleaning up the mess that these men had left behind, and was saying, enough is enough. Like, we have to change something. This is in our power. This is ridiculous. And that is the foundation of the word of wisdom that has been given to us. That is the foundation of what we have. And as I see the pieces that were left behind when my father passed away, and when I see what happened to my husband, I was like, enough is enough. We have got to do something about it. And God gave us this direction. He gave us the answers. I think nowadays it gets so confusing. Everyone is saying one thing or the next. This is what's really important when it comes to heart disease. It's the sugar, and cholesterol doesn't matter. What are you thinking? It's not about cholesterol. That's ridiculous. Who do we believe? Who do we turn to for guidance? It's so confusing. And that is why I know that the answers are in the word of wisdom. And if we follow these answers, if we're eating more plants, if we're eating meat sparingly or not at all, that the promise at the end of the word of wisdom is true. In Doctrine and Covenants 89:18, it says, "And all saints who remember to keep and do these sayings, walking in obedience to the commandments, shall receive health in their navel and marrow in their bones, and shall find wisdom and great treasures of knowledge, even hidden treasures, and shall run and not be weary, and shall walk and not faint. And I, the Lord, give unto them a promise, that the destroying angel shall pass by them as the children of Israel and not slay them." The destroying angel. What is the destroying angel in today's society? It's heart disease. It's cancer. It's diabetes. And we'll go deeper into cancer and diabetes later, but I want to talk about the number one cause of death, the number one destroying angel. And why, if we listen to every single aspect of the word of wisdom, not just pick and choose the parts we like, but if we follow the entirety of it, that the destroying angel will pass by us and that we will be able to live longer, healthier lives. And it can be so confusing because nowadays it's like, okay, it's all about the sugar. We know it's about insulin resistance and that carbs are the problem and it's the starch and the sugar. And I believe there's truth to that, no question. And I'm going to dive deeper in just a second. But you cannot put all carbs in one category. You can't. It's not fair to carbs. There's sweet potatoes, right? And then there's candy. They are not the same, even though they're technically both carbs. There's a difference between whole grains and candy. That's a totally different thing. And in Doctrine and Covenants, we are actually not only suggested to eat meat sparingly, which I talked about in the last episode, and to eat more plant foods, which I'll talk about more later on, but specifically in verse 17, we're told to eat more grain. I know, right? It says, "Nevertheless, wheat for man and corn for the ox and oats for the horse and rye for the fowls and for swine and for all beasts of the field and barley for all useful animals and for mild drinks, and also other grain." Now, I know some people have gluten issues, allergies, genetic history. You cannot eat gluten, and I get that. So wheat is not for you, but also specified about other grain, right? That there are other grain, that grains are actually good for us in their whole form. The problem is most of us are eating refined grains. We're eating a lot of the processed, either white bread or even just any type of processed foods that have been completely refined, where the good parts of it, the vitamins and the germ, is completely separated. So we're not getting the benefits. In fact, it does increase your risk of heart disease when you're eating refined grains. But when you're eating the food in its whole form, it's actually amazing. Whole grains are a powerful component of a heart-healthy diet due to their high content of fiber, antioxidants, and essential nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. In fact, research has shown that consuming whole grains such as oats, brown rice, quinoa, and even, yes, whole wheat can reduce the risk of heart disease by up to 25%. Now that is a destroying angel passing right by you. The fiber in whole grains help to lower cholesterol levels, improve blood pressure, and reduce inflammation. Now, these are all critical factors for heart health. And I don't think we realize that there are actually a lot of antioxidants in whole grains. And these antioxidants can help prevent and protect against oxidative stress, which can damage blood vessels and lead to heart disease. And to reap these benefits, experts recommend eating at least 3 servings of whole grains per day, which can be easily incorporated into meals like adding quinoa, adding any type of whole grain that you enjoy. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be brown rice instead of white rice. It can be whole wheat bread instead of just regular white bread. We can easily add these to our diet. And when we are so afraid of carbs and we think that carbs are the problem, we miss out on these benefits. Food is nuanced, it's complicated, but this one thing has been given to us and shown that it can help. Now, you may be saying, but wait, what about insulin resistance? Everyone's talking about insulin resistance. And isn't it the starch? Isn't it eating too many of these carbs that's causing insulin resistance? And we've heard that insulin resistance ends up leading to heart disease. Let's talk about it. If you've been following any of these trends, you've probably heard about insulin resistance and how it can relate to diabetes, but this can also be a major contributor to heart disease. So what is insulin resistance? What am I talking about? It's what happens when your cells stop responding properly to insulin, which is the hormone that helps regulate blood sugar. When this happens, your pancreas works overtime to produce more insulin, leading to chronically high levels in your bloodstream. And what's interesting about this is that insulin is the fat storage hormone. So when insulin can't do its job properly, it's basically telling your body to store fat, store fat, store fat, store fat, which isn't helping anything, because over time, this will lead to increased inflammation, which will damage blood vessels, which make heart attacks more likely to occur. It also leads to higher triglycerides because your body is saying store fat, store fat, store fat. And so there's a higher fat storage, especially in the liver, increasing triglyceride levels, raising your heart disease risk, and it ends up making more dangerous LDL particles. Now, not all LDL cholesterol is created equal, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but insulin resistance leads to smaller, denser LDL particles, which are more likely to cause plaque buildup. So it does need to be addressed. We do want to minimize these big blood sugar spikes, and eating bread, no question, eating potatoes and bread can cause these big blood sugar spikes. But if it's good for you and it has this side effect, what do you do? How do you mitigate it? Well, number one, I always tell people to eat fiber first, eat more vegetables first. That's going to minimize a big blood sugar spike. But also it's important to understand the actual cause of insulin resistance, that this is just the symptom, these big blood sugar spikes, and it's not the underlying cause. The underlying cause of insulin resistance, which not enough people talk about, and because it wasn't even discovered until 1999 at Yale University when they finally had the technology to look at it on a deeper microscopic level. And that's when they understood that, okay, first of all, we know that insulin is the key that unlocks the door that lets the glucose that's in your blood into the muscle cell, into where it needs to go. But fat doesn't need an invitation. Fat doesn't need something like insulin to let it come in. Fat can just come into the cell whenever it wants. And what happens is when we're eating too much saturated fat. Now, saturated fat is mostly found in animal products. So that's the thing. It's butter, it's meat, it's dairy, all of those things. That's where you find most saturated fat in our food supply today. Okay. You can also find it in coconut oil and palm oil, but it's mostly in animal products. And when saturated fat comes into the cell, it basically gums up the lock so that insulin is the key that unlocks the door that lets sugar in. It can't do its job properly. And when it can't do its job properly, the pancreas is like, okay, well, we should just create more insulin. Let's send out more insulin, and you become insulin resistant. You start storing more fat. Now, there's two types of fat. There's the saturated fat that you're eating, but it can also be caused by just the fat that you're wearing, just being overweight. Even if you're not eating a lot of saturated fat, but say you're eating just too many other refined carbs, like the sugar, the starch that we talked about, but the not good sugar starch, the refined carbs that leads to weight gain, that can also influence insulin's ability to do its job properly. That fat that you're wearing on your body can make it so that the lock is gummed up. And that's why weight loss in general, no matter how you lose weight, it is always going to improve your heart disease risk. Okay. But weight loss alone is not the full picture. Weight loss alone isn't the whole thing. And that's why how many of you know of these really skinny, athletic, fit individuals still have heart attacks? And I would like to question, is it all genetic? When we did our family history and we looked through all of the individuals in our family tree that died from some type of heart disease, I was astounded by how many of them died from heart disease. And I think a major contributor was there was a lot of alcoholics in my family line, but I also think, is it genetics or is it your love of alcohol? Is it your love of sausage? Is it your love of bacon? Is it your love of processed meats? You know, I love my dad. I thought he was amazing. He loved bologna. Like he loved hot dogs. He loved things that are known to cause heart disease. It wasn't sugar. He wasn't eating sugar late at night. That's why it's so complex. And you can't just say it's black or white. It's just because you're eating sugar. It's just because you're eating processed meats. I think they all play a role. Exercise, staying active is so important, but even the fittest person can have heart disease if their diet isn't supporting their health. That's why in the Word of Wisdom it doesn't even talk about, and exercise. We need to first address your diet, what it is that you're eating, how you can add in more plant foods. So now that we understand the whole complexity of what contributes to heart disease, how does a plant-based diet help? Number one, when you're eating meat sparingly or not at all, like it's outlined in the Word of Wisdom, you're avoiding processed meats. Ultra processed foods are going to be the number one contributor. So that's not only is that going to be soda. Remember, the insulin resistance does play a role. And if you're drinking soda and there's tons of sugar that's shooting up in your bloodstream, that's going to play a role. So we want to minimize meats and sweets. And the particular meats that are the easiest to take off are going to be the processed meats. Yes, bacon. It does matter. It does contribute to heart disease. Yes, hot dogs. Yes, lunch meats. I know. Yes, all of these things like sausage may actually help reduce your blood sugar spikes. And this is where it's so conflicting online because some people will say it's just insulin resistance. So how about you have sausage for breakfast? Okay. Yes, that will minimize a blood sugar spike, but it's also increasing your risk of heart disease in other ways. So you have to look at the big picture. It's meats and it's sweets. Okay. We have to minimize, especially processed meats. Number one. And number two, if you're minimizing overall meat intake, that means you're eating more fiber rich foods. On your plate is not just a bunch of, let's say, steak and some vegetables. We're going to be eating more whole plant foods like beans that are going to help reverse insulin resistance. The best way and most effective way to reverse insulin resistance is to reduce the amount of saturated fat that you're consuming. So beef is a big source. Yes, I know you can still have steak occasionally, sparingly, but if it's not every single day, then you're going to see the benefits, especially if you add more foods that are high in fiber like beans, whole grains, and vegetables. These will help to stabilize your blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. In fact, beans and lentils have what's called the lentil effect, that when you consume them over the next 24 hours, you have better blood sugar levels because of the fiber, because of all the beneficial things like the antioxidants, the polyphenols. They're going to help you. Plant-based diets are naturally low in saturated fat, which is the key driver of insulin resistance and heart disease. And a study published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology found that plant-based diets not only lower cholesterol, but also reduce inflammation and improve overall heart function. Another study from Diabetes Care showed that people who followed a plant-based diet had significantly lower insulin resistance compared to those eating a standard American diet. Now, I do want to address one final thing, and that is the claim that cholesterol numbers don't matter. LDL cholesterol doesn't matter. The longest living people in the world have high cholesterol. It's so frustrating because we need to dive deeper. Yes, insulin resistance plays a big role, but cholesterol numbers still matter. Specifically, two markers that give us the clearest picture of heart disease risk. Okay. So marker number one is ApoB. This measures the number of LDL particles in your blood, which is a stronger predictor of heart disease than just total cholesterol. So yeah, maybe total cholesterol doesn't matter as much as we thought it did, but ApoB numbers do matter. And they're a type of LDL cholesterol that does lead to more plaque formation in your arteries. So no matter who you are, you should ask your doctor to get those numbers. Another thing to look at, because I do know that while genetics load the gun, diet pulls the trigger, and you can see if you're at a higher risk genetically. And that's going to be told by your Lp(a) numbers. So this is a genetically determined cholesterol marker that increases the risk of heart attacks. While diet alone won't lower Lp(a), eating a plant-based diet can help reduce overall plaque buildup and inflammation. Now, cholesterol numbers, particularly LDL, are closely linked to the development and progression of the atherosclerotic plaque in the arteries, which can lead to heart disease. In fact, you may have heard maybe one study or this or that. I don't care about one-off studies. I look at comprehensive meta-analysis, and a comprehensive meta-analysis of randomized trials encompassing data from 34 studies with 270,000 plus participants examine the impact of LDL reduction on mortality outcomes. And the findings indicated that the more intensive LDL lowering was associated with a greater reduction in both all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. So not just heart disease risk, but overall any type of cause of mortality, but especially in those patients who have a higher level of LDL right now. So if you have a higher LDL level and you can lower it overall, I'm sorry, people can say cholesterol doesn't matter, but that's not what the research shows. It does matter. So where do you want your LDL cholesterol to be? basically regarding what is the healthy range, that it may even be lower than what has been previously recommended. For instance, research indicates that the native hunter-gatherers that we're thinking of and other healthy humans that don't have a risk of heart disease usually have levels of LDL cholesterol that are between 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. Additionally, a study focused on lipid lowering therapy and coronary plaque regression suggested that reducing LDL cholesterol to below 80 is where you want to be to significantly reduce your risk of heart disease. So we want that number to be low. When my husband had his stroke, I think his number was around 120. So it wasn't even that high, but it was high enough that he was at a higher risk of stroke. So LDL cholesterol does matter. Now, here are my final thoughts on all of this. When there's so much nutrition confusion in this world, like there's so many good people that are saying completely opposite things. I know so many good, wonderful people that are trying to live a righteous life, but they feel like cholesterol doesn't matter. I know so many good people that love their steak. I know so many good people that love bacon, and that's fine. But if you want the destroying angel to pass by you, there are universal laws and principles that we need to follow. And they're outlined in the Doctrine and Covenants. We can choose not to follow them. We're not a better or worse person whether or not we follow them. And I think that's where it gets tricky. Sometimes we associate what we eat with morality. And while I do understand a lot of vegans' standpoint that, look, animals are living terrible lives and we should accept more responsibility, that God gave Adam dominion over the animals, and how are we actually using that dominion? I get that. And we can talk about that in next episodes. But overall, for most of us, you're not a better or worse person depending on what you choose to eat. But you can live a life where you have more energy, where weight loss is just easy and a side effect. You don't even have to think about going on a diet because you're just eating a naturally healthy diet. You can improve your gut health. You can live a longer life if you're prioritizing more plant foods and following the direction that was just given to us in the Word of Wisdom. It's a gift to us. It's a gift that if we follow this, we will have these blessings, and we can choose not to. And that's totally fine, but we don't have those same promises. Could my dad still be here today? I don't know. I don't know if we have an appointed lifespan. In fact, when I thought of him and his death, and I was trying to reconcile what had happened but what if this, what if that, what if I could have actually reached him and he could have chosen to eat a healthier diet? I mean, my dad still did drive his car every day without a seatbelt on. It's because he had a bigger belly and he just wasn't comfortable with the seatbelt. He literally drove every single day without a seatbelt. He could have died in a car accident just like that, just as fast. I don't know. I don't know if we all have a specific health span, but I do know that my dad would have enjoyed his life a lot more if he didn't have that big belly to lug around. I do know he would have had more confidence. I do know that he would have been just more sure of himself and enjoyed life a little bit more. And so I also know that those who follow this way have been promised that the destroying angel will pass by you. So maybe we do have an influence on how long we live. Maybe we can make choices that increase our lifespan because it is outlined like that in the Word of Wisdom. So I know that I don't know all the answers, but what I can tell you is that what you eat matters. That eating more whole plant foods, that eating whole grains, that eating meat sparingly can improve your life. So until next time, I hope that you remember it's all about progress over perfection. You don't have to be perfect at this. And that's why I love that it's sparingly, right? It's not black or white, but just one meatless meal a week can reduce your risk of dying from all causes by 12%. So it's worth trying it out. And I have some pretty great recipes on my YouTube channel, so make sure to check those out as well. And also, I want to say that in my membership, we outline the easiest way to eat all the fruits and vegetables that you want and getting adequate protein and getting the whole grains so that you can do this in a method that doesn't feel overwhelming, so that you can eat enough protein at your plate, your whole grain, your fruit, and your vegetable in a way that seems natural and delicious. And you lose weight without even trying if that's your goal, or you just have more energy. It's amazing and it works. So feel free to check out our membership as well. Thank you for listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Ali Essig. And if you need more help and support with transitioning to eating more plants so you can lose weight and feel better, improve your gut health, and just reduce your risk of chronic disease, then make sure to check out my PlantWise membership. That's PlantWhys, because I like to teach the why behind eating more plants. But if all you need is just a couple more delicious recipes that feed your family and everyone loves, and not to mention super simple and easy, then make sure to check out my YouTube channel, which is also PlantWhys, PlantWhys. Hope to see you there.